Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello and welcome to episode 26 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is Mark Leslie Lefebvre, your reflective host. And no, I'm not just talking about the light that reflects off of my bald head. I'm talking about the sharing about what I learn when speaking with my guests. The feature interview in today's episode is with horror author Armand Rosamilia. And now Armand is originally from New Jersey and he currently lives in sunny Florida with his wife. He's written over 150 stories that are all currently available, and they include horror and zombies and contemporary fiction and thrillers and more. His goal is to write a good story and not worry so much about genre labels. Armand not only writes, but he runs two successful podcasts, Armcast, which is dead sexy horror podcast, and then the Mando Method podcast, which we talk about in the interview, and that's with co-host Chuck Buddha. And this is something I just added to my ongoing podcast subscriptions because I love the Mando Method that he talks about in the interview. Armand not only hosts those two podcasts, but he owns the network that they're on too, which is called Project Entertainment Network, and we talk a little bit about that. Now, when he's not writing, when he's not podcasting, and when he's not doing baseball-related activities, you might occasionally find him sleeping. Now, having been in the horror writer circles for decades, I was familiar with his name, and I'm sure we know some of the same people, but I'd never actually interacted with them directly. Now, somehow, and this is likely via social media, maybe about a month or so ago, the huge craft beer in me caught sight of something intriguing that Armand was doing called the Beers and Fears Tour. Now, I mentioned it briefly in the previous episode, episode 25, and so in this episode, you'll hear my delightful chat with Armand. But if you're hearing that, this means that it's time for the terrible tongue twister segment of the show. Twisted by the, twisted by the, twisted by the, twisted by the, twisted by the fool, twisted by the fool, twisted by the fool. Such a fool. Now this episode's tongue twister, which is sponsored by Findaway Voices, comes from Edward, who sent a short, quick tongue twister stumbler for me. And that alone was a stumbler. And the stumbler is very short. It's Eddie edited it. Eddie edited it. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay, wow, can't even say it. But I'm supposed to say it 5 times really fast, and Edward requested that I say this in a cartoonish character voice. So I've decided to go with the voice that comedian Dave Coulier used way back when on America's Funniest People, a television show many years ago, for the jackalope character. So here it is, 5 times fast. And here's the voice I'm going to use. Eddie edited it. 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 It sounded like a broken machine there, didn't I? So that's the tongue twister. Thanks, Edward, for sending that in. Now, if you have a tongue twister that you want to hear me say, or even a voice you want to hear me say it in, let me know in the comments for the show at starkreflections.ca, or ping me on Twitter at Mark Leslie, or email me, mark@markleslie.ca. And if you want a professionally edited and produced audiobook from a narrator who doesn't stumble over their words, or doesn't sound like a broken machine, and folks that can do solid character voices in their narration, check out Findaway Voices. This is a great author-friendly platform that allows you the control over the creation and distribution and pricing for your audiobooks. Check them out at starkreflections.ca/findaway. Such a fool. Now this fun and silly, thanks Will, look what you started, corporate sponsorship from Findaway Voices pays for the hosting for the podcast, but it's the patron support via Patreon that helps pay for my time in recording and producing the show. And a huge thank you to all patrons for your ongoing support. It means so much to me. Now your support, which you can do for as little as $1 a month via patreon.com/ Stark Reflections lets me know that you appreciate the content that I'm providing. In return, I post extra content there that I hope provides you with even more value and insights into writing, publishing, and specifics related to my own publishing journey. There are currently 17 posts on Patreon as I record this. 5 are open for anyone to be able to enjoy, and there are another 12 exclusively for patrons, and I'll continue to post both the free to everyone as well as patron-only content there. You can also, of course, show your support by sharing this podcast with a writer friend who you think will get value from it, or leave a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or the many various podcatchers out there, because then that helps other writers find this podcast. But enough preamble. Let's get to the interview with Armand. Hey Armand, welcome to the podcast.
What's going on, Mark?
So you've got many hats that you wear. Obviously, I mean, you've got hundreds of short stories, and I can't even count the number of books that you have published and are part of. You're a podcast host, you baseball aficionado, you've got all these things going on. How do you prioritize your time with all of these different things that you're doing?
It's not easy at all, and I fall behind a lot. I'm creative, so I just, whatever I want to do, I do. And my wife helps me a lot with that because she's a commercial property manager. So she deals with contracts and people and stuff every day. So most of it is her coming home 6 or 7 o'clock at night and saying, "What have you gotten done today?" And me kind of like a little kid going, "Well, I started this, or I got, this many words done, or whatever." And then I kind of feel bad. She doesn't guilt me, but it's just the question that makes me feel bad. So then I'll, kind of prioritize for either that night or the next day. So
okay, so so that's sort of the post activity of the day summary that kind of puts you back on track every day.
Yeah, pretty much.
How long have you been writing full time?
This will be 7 years now.
7 years. So what was the clincher? So at what point did you get where you said, okay, you know what, I'm going to now do this full time?
I was a retail manager for 20-something years, and I literally hated every day of it. And I always wrote, but I never had the sales or really the push. I was in a couple of bad relationships that they really hated me writing. They thought that what little time I had, I was working 70, 80 hours a week, and then what little time I had, I wasn't spending with them. I was off in my fantasy worlds writing, and my kids were a lot younger then as well, so I spent a lot of time. And then I got laid off, and while I was looking for a job, I said, you know what, I'm going to just start writing. I'm going to write more. I'm going to kind of between job interviews, I'm going to do this schedule, and I started selling, and I got very lucky because a company, Hobbs End Publishing, liked my work, and they actually came to me and said, "Hey, we're going to be working with a Hollywood company coming up, and we would love for you. They're doing a couple of zombie movies, like B zombie movies. We would love for you maybe to pitch in and write." And I ended up over the course of the next 2.5 years writing, I think, 14 tie-in novels for them, either writing something that was already coming out or based on a script or something completely different so they could use it. And that was great, and that was a lot of money, and I paid all my bills off. I was able to really prioritize, and at that point I just said, you know what, I never want to go into retail again. And that's kind of the fear that drives me. I mean, still to this day, I just don't want to do that again.
It's funny. Fear drives you to want to write, but fear drives so much of what you write too, right? That's as a author. So the difference between writing an original work that comes from your imagination, etc., and working on adapting a screenplay into a novella, how different was the process for you?
For me, it was frustrating because I'm a pantser. So the characters, kind of dictate where we're going in the story and stuff. I always have like that what if idea, that little moment, but I never have the ending concrete in my head. I never have the middle. That's to me, that's the fun of writing. So when you have that structure, and as I'm writing those, unfortunately, a lot of those movies all have those same 3 or 4 scenes. So as I'm writing them, I'm almost like I could almost copy and paste this from the last 2 that I've done, change the character names, because it's a lot of that similar Hollywood, stuff.
Right.
And it wasn't just zombie movies. It was I wrote a few thrillers and different things like that for them as well. I even Ghost wrote a military romance for them.
Oh, wow.
So it was a real struggle for me on some of those, because I knew where the story should go. And then sometimes when you're reading, I'm like, oh, why did they go there with it? But then there's other times where I'm like, okay, hey, that's a good idea. I understand that. And actually it helped me long term with my writing, because I could look at different scenes and kind of, write as if I'm writing that screenplay, or I'm writing that visual and I think I'm doing that more now than I ever have.
Okay. Wow. You'd said something that sort of inspired me there, is the pantser thing, because I find myself doing that a lot. Now, when you start, do you at least have a rough idea? I mean, you kind of know the characters and then the situation, and then you just kind of follow them along and record what they're doing?
I kind of do more than the elevator pitch. I kind of do that what if moment. So like when I started years ago, when I started writing my Dying Days zombie series, I happened to just be driving. I live in Jacksonville, Florida now, and I happen to be driving from St. Augustine down A1A, and there's this gorgeous area called Matanzas Inlet, and Matanzas means murder, by the way, or massacre, which is fun. And I see all these people on the beach, and as we're driving, me and my wife, and in my head, of course, I go, how cool would it be if zombies just came out of the surf? Because zombie movies and stuff is always the dark, it's raining, it's in a city, it's desolate. I said, how cool would it be if it was just gorgeous and sunny and zombies? So that was my what if moment, to write a zombie series set in Florida.
Wow.
That didn't have those types of, I guess, weather or city cliches in them.
Okay.
And that to me, that was all I needed to just, okay, give me a character and let me start running with it.
Okay. And then how do you decide if it's going to be a full-blown novel, or it ends up being a short story, or somewhere in between? How does that work?
I think once I start writing it, usually I can kind of get an idea. I've gotten a lot better at that as well, because doing the Hollywood stuff, basically they're paying me for, say, 40,000 words. So I can't write under that, but they don't want me to go over that. So maybe 1 or 2 chapters in, the story kind of starts forming in my head, and then I'll know, hey, if I got to do, say, 100,000 words, I'm going to need a couple of subplots here, or I'm going to need a lot more characterization here. Right now I'm doing a novella for a company, and it's 25,000 words. So I know in my head I can probably get that within 500 words based on just the rough idea in my head.
Wow. So many questions that I want to ask you, but I want to now drive right
No
from...
more questions, Mark.
No more. It's all over now, right? the co-authoring, because you have co-authored books.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you co-author, I mean, do you pants together? How does that work? Or is there at least how do you divide it up so that everyone's on the right page?
I guess I've gotten lucky so far, because the people that I've co-written with are also technically pantsers.
Okay. So they don't get upset with you then?
So yeah, and so I wrote a series called Shocker with Frank J. Edler. I'm on my 4th book I'm writing with Jay Wilburn now. I wrote in the past a Dying Days offshoot, a couple books with author Tim Baker. And so it's really like we kind of pitch the idea back and forth, and we talk about it. And that's pretty much it. Like me and Jay kind of take turns. So I'll say, like the one we're working on now, I'll give him the elevator pitch, and I'll say, this is what the story is about. This is the character. And then he'll ask questions, and we go back and forth. But then pretty much I'm writing the first 1 or 2 chapters and sending it to him, and then we're off. And then that's pretty much it. The only time I've had to do that is Robert Chas-Chute and I are writing a series together, and which hasn't been released or anything, but he needs that structure. So we actually talked out the book, sitting on Skype for several hours, and he took a lot of notes, and he actually put an outline together for the first book. And then it was fun. It was different for me. It was fun because I was able to really jump into any chapter I wanted.
Right.
Or if I was writing more of a certain character than he was at that time, I got to jump in and basically write those chapters, which was fun.
Cool. That's fantastic. Now, you talked about 7 years ago you managed to become a full-time writer, and a lot of writers don't become full-time writers because it's hard. And I've spoken with friends of mine who have been full-time writers and traditionally published authors, and they're saying that the advances aren't what they once were. But you managed to. So 7 years ago, before the trend in people being able to take advantage of digital and use indie publishing and self-publishing to be able to make a full-time living, you did this with traditional publishing and Hollywood, sort of that combination of movie tie-in, etc. Has that changed much in terms of in the last 7 years? Is it a combination of selling to publishers and then stuff that you release independently?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a hybrid, so I work with a lot of different small presses, and then I self-publish a lot. But I actually got in right when it was really starting to boom, and with Amazon and all that. I had released some fantasy books in 2004, 2005
Right.
on my own. It was, I mean, literally, I had somebody who had to print the books for me, and I would sell them. And it was you get a stigma from that. I mean, it was you were a vanity. It was looked at as your books. Publishers don't want these books, so you're going to do them yourself. I mean, it was really bad. So when I got in, it was kind of started to be that change. J.A. Conrath was very instrumental for me, not only reading his blog and seeing he was so 100% traditional publishing, and then all of a sudden it just changed to, wait a minute, I can do this on my own and make a lot more money, and with Amazon and everything else. So for me, that was very cool to say, hey, other people are doing it, and they're doing it well. So I try to do both. I try not to put all my eggs in one basket. I'm not 100% like self-publishing is the be-all, end-all, or I'm only legitimate if I'm with a big 5 publisher,
right,
or I have to sell a certain number of books, small press, and all that. I like to have fun with it, and I like to mix and match for me.
So I imagine that's similar to when you begin a project. You may not be sure if it's a short story or a novel or whatever it becomes. You probably gear each project uniquely to whatever path is probably best for that particular work, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's a business, so you have to look at it. In the beginning, I wrote a ton of short stories. I wrote a ton of novels that will never get sold because they're just maybe not something that my reader is going to want to read, or the mass market out there is going to want to read. So you start to learn that it's great when you're first starting out. You just write whatever you want. It's awesome. And I still write stuff that I enjoy and that I'm behind, but I also have to really look at it and kind of look at my schedule and go, what is selling for me right now? When I did the first, before I did Dying Days, I did one called Highway to Hell, which is an extreme zombie book, with the goal of I'm going to write one zombie book to get it out of my system and then move on to other stuff. And then that led into the Dying Days series, and 9 books, later, that's still my biggest seller, even though the last one came out a few months ago. So not that I kept writing them because I was making a lot of money with it, but I still enjoyed it. And by the time I got to 7, I said, you know what, 2 more books. I don't want to do Dying Days 406 because it's making me money. I don't want to just keep rehashing stuff.
Right.
So that was important to me. There's that balance, but it gets to a point where I still have to pay the bills.
Of course, yeah, you've got to balance that creative energy with the business, because at the end of the day, your wife comes home and is going to ask you what you contributed to the business today.
Pretty much, yeah.
Now, you host a couple podcasts that are very horror specific, where you talk to people from the industry, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about those and how that ties back into your own life as a writer?
I started Armcast Podcast. It's going on 5 years now, And before that, I was a DJ on the radio. I was at an AM station, which became an FM station. And on Friday nights, me and another author, Tim Baker, we would interview local authors and things like that. And he's also a writer, so we would just talk shop. And I enjoyed it, but the travel got to be too much. It was an hour and a half
Right.
to get there, and then and then I did a 2-hour metal show after that. So at midnight, I'm driving home, and my Saturday sometimes was shot. And then I was really listening to a lot of podcasts, so I just got into it, and I started doing Armcast with the idea of, it was selfish. It was for me. It was, let me interview authors that are doing better than me. Let me do authors that seem to have things that I'm missing, and I'm going to interview them, pick their brain, and I'm going to try to use some of that stuff. And if people are listening, they're listening, but I don't care. Pretty much. And so then we got on a network. I got it on a network, and I did a second show for a while, for almost a year. And then I started, I think we're close to episode 100 now. So it's been about 2 years. Me and author Chuck Buda, we do what's called the Mondo Method podcast. And the name comes from I was kind of goofing around. I have a specific writing routine that I do every day. So at the top of every hour, I write for 15 minutes,
Right.
as much as I can. It's usually like 600-700 words. And then the next 45 minutes I can play, do emails, whatever. And I do that 3 or 4 times a day. And I'm usually getting my 2,000 or 3,000 words. So I call that the Mondo method because my nickname is Mondo. And it was kind of started out as a joke, and it really took off, and it was a hashtag. So when me and Chuck started our podcast, the Mondo Method, it was about writing. It was about, I've been doing this for a very long time. This year will be 30 years since my first short story was published.
Wow.
And Chuck has only been doing this for about 2 or 3 years. So I guess the ego for me was, we're going to do this, and I'm going to teach this kid, even though we're the same age, I'm going to teach him everything that I know, and he's just going to bow at my feet kind of thing. And then I realized, wow, he's teaching me as much as I'm teaching him about the business and about the changes and everything else, because I'm that, old man who's kind of stuck back 10 years ago in, learning stuff, and he's really good at it. So that's really helped. So the two podcasts are on Project Entertainment Network, which me and my wife now own. So it's we've owned it for about a year and a half, and we have usually 24 or more podcasts on it. So it's if I can give a little plug, it's The Horror Show with Brian Keene, Three Guys with Beards, which is Jonathan Maybury, James A. Moore, and Christopher Golden. Mary San Giovanni has Cosmic Shenanigans. Jay Wilburn is on there with Matters of Faith. I mean, there's just tons of really, really good, and it's not just horror. We have lifestyles, we have wrestling, we have, just anything you can think of. And we're continuing to grow and build the network.
It's entertainment, basically. I mean, I recognize a lot of big names.
Yeah, and that's
associated with horror, if not horror writers. But of course,
right.
And it expands from there. That must be really satisfying to have seen that grow.
And it's grown every month. And it's grown huge from the year and a half when we took over. And we have merchandising, and we're doing a lot of different things. Scares That Care weekend, the charity convention every year we go to, and last year and this year they're doing a podcast room. So, and we have 9 different podcasts which will be recording in that room. In fact, Project Entertainment Network is the sponsor of the podcast room.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you? I'd love for my listeners to hear a little bit more about Scares That Care. Not just because it rhymes
It's a charity. They help 3 different specific need every year. So like a woman with breast cancer, someone who's a burn victim, a child who has, say, leukemia. And the goal is to raise and donate $10,000 towards each of them every year. And I got in on the second. I missed the first year, but I've been there every other year, and I've been in, except for 1 year, I've been in the celebrity room, which is awesome. And I mean, it's different from a regular convention because it's just so positive, and literally all the money raised goes towards the charity.
Oh, it's fantastic. Where is it held? Sorry.
It's held in Williamsburg, Virginia. Every this year it'll be in the first weekend in August.
Okay.
And it's just amazing. And there's just some really, really great names, not only in the horror, it's the horror community authors, but there's also actors and musicians and other people that really donate their time in the weekend for it. And the crowds get bigger and bigger every year. It's very family friendly. And Joe Ripple and his staff just do an amazing job in putting this together.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll make sure that there's going to be links to that in the show notes as well, because I think that's it's always great when writers can come together for a common good cause, and then take the horror writers who love to scare and inspire people and focusing on the shadows, focusing on using that for good. I love that. That is fantastic. Now, because we were talking about rhyming events, one of the reasons we've been in contact. Now, I've seen your name and known your name in the horror community for years and years and years, because you've been one of those names of these, as you said, 30 years. As I was growing up as a horror writer, I've looked at, there's this guy who's doing all this stuff and publishing all these stories, and I've seen you in various anthologies, etc. But then I paid even more attention because I saw that you combined your love of horror with your love of craft beer. And that was the Beers and Fears. And so that's when I reached out to you in the last month or so, just to chat a little bit more about that. How did that start?
It started 3 years ago. I had my wife had never been. She's from here in Jacksonville, Florida, so she had never been up north. I grew up in New Jersey, so I was constantly telling her how better the food was, and I missed friends and on, telling her about my hometown. And so we decided, okay, on our 1 year anniversary, one of the things we were going to do was take a trip up there, and with the idea of we were going to go from Florida to Maine and back. And we went and saw, like, on our anniversary. I'm a huge Boston Red Sox fan, even though I'm from New Jersey. We actually went to Fenway, and we actually saw a baseball game. That was our first major league game, and I basically took her to all the places to eat and all that. So while we were up there, I said, well, let's see if I can do a signing or something. We could write some of this off. And I started writing a book called Belford Stories, which was Belford, New Jersey is where I grew up. And looking around, I said, well, I need a place to sign it. And I don't like doing bookstores. I think it's boring and impersonal. I've done cigar shops. I've done a lot of different bars and different things. I even did a signing years ago in a pool supply store. I mean, just wherever you can do a signing. And I looked around and I said, well, what's in Belford? And somebody said, well, how about Belford Brewing Company? I said, perfect. And it ended up that the guy who runs it, Kevin Enney, played guitar in my punk band in high school, 30 years ago. So that was pretty cool. So we got in touch and I said, hey, I want to do this signing. We've never done it. He's never done it before. And I finished Belford Stories, the first book, and I invited everybody I hadn't seen in years and years. And, I blew through all the books, like, quickly. But Chuck Buda, who had been a fan of mine, who lives in New Jersey, he actually came to that event, and I met him in person. And we had that really cool rapport right away. We like all the same things. We love the same music. We're actually born 2 days apart and same age. So, I mean, everything was, like, really, really cool. So, and we had a great time. Me and my wife had a phenomenal time. So I said, the next year, let's do it again. But let's invite other authors to do it with me. And I said, well, we'll have Chuck. Because at that point, we had started hanging out and everything else. And it just kind of put together. So it ended up being, me, Chuck Buda, Frank Edler, and Tim Meyer. Because the four of us had that, we were all Jersey guys, and we all kind of had that same idea. And I said, let's do this, and we'll do Belford, but maybe do other ones. Because those guys had basically stolen the idea from me and started doing other breweries signings, which was great because by the time we set up the next one, we had places to go. And last year we did four different signings. Every one of them went well. We had other authors involved. Dan Padavana was at one of them. So we just had a good time with it. And the structure is really simple. My wife handles all the money behind the table, and we sell all the books $10 or 3 for $20, which means most people are taking a 20 out of their pocket and sampling 3 different authors.
Right.
And we're selling a ton of books that way. And it's not about how much profit we can make. It's about reaching new readers, and none of us stand behind the table. We're all out walking around, having beers, talking to people, taking pictures, just having a great time.
So it's like a party where there happen to be books available,
Right.
and you're just mingling and chatting.
Exactly. And people, people who are there, the fun of that is people who are there that have no idea who we are. After 2 or 3 beers, they're wandering over. After 4 or 5 beers, they're buying a book.
That's what we need. It's people walking around malls with beers.
Yeah, exactly. Or in a bookstore, you'd have alcohol. I bet you'd sell a lot more books. So that was the beginning of it. Was really last year we did Beers and Fears, and we came up with the whole concept and everything else. And then we did five this year, and we added Dan Padavona did 2 shows with us. Todd Kiesling got involved. Summer Cannon, that was her very first book signing, which was very cool. And then Matt Minacchio was also on the tour. So
that's fantastic. And it looked like I was sort of following you guys on Instagram and Facebook and just watching as this was going on, and went, well, this is like the best of all possible worlds, right? You've got great horror books and similar titles. They were mostly horror, I think.
Yeah, mostly. But I mean, but there's a lot of us write different things. Chuck writes a weird Western series, and but I mean, mostly it was the horror books and stuff, which is cool. And then we're all different because I mean, Frank Edler writes more bizarro stuff. Dan Padavona writes really like that slasher movie, creepy books like that. I write a ton of different genres, so. It's a lot of fun doing it, and we met a ton of people. And the cool part was other authors were showing up and hanging out with us, at different signings, which was neat.
That's really cool. Now I want to go back to Belford Stories, because you'd mentioned that 3 years ago you'd had this collection of stories that were set in your original hometown, and you've released a 3rd one already. It must have been that popular that people just they can't get enough of the Belford Stories.
I basically did the first one to just say, you know what, let me just bring this to Belford when I do that signing, because it was only the first signing that year. So let me just bring it, and I'll just sell a ton of them there, and then it'll be done. And I actually sold a lot of them. It's contemporary fiction. It's not horror at all. It's just basically it's set in over a specific Friday and Saturday night in 1987.
Okay.
With basically fictionalized characters in the town I grew up in, and a lot of people loved it. A lot of people wanted more. So I said, okay, good. So for last year, a few weeks before I went back and did a Belford signing, we released the 2nd one. Same thing this year. We released the 3rd one, and the next book is 5 years in the future. So where are these characters 5 years later, and what new characters am I introducing? It's a lot of fun. So, so obviously next year will be Belford Stories 4.
So are they connected short stories that tell an overall single story arc, or how does that work?
It's they're short, maybe 1,000-word, 1,500 word short stories, and it's like 40 to 50 chapters. Of basically characters might be in and out of certain chapters, but it's pretty much this, say, dozen characters that we're following, and then we follow them 5 years later, and some of them are doing well, some of them are doing horrible, that's kind of the fun. So it's the fun of me. Every year I get to revisit these characters.
That's cool. That's a very Canadian sort of thing, with Stephen Leacock and Alice Munro, who are Canadian writers who had these things that they were books, but they were all interconnected short stories that sort of told a narrative of a small town or something like that. I love that. That's fantastic. Yeah. So what are the other kinds that you've done? Obviously, because you talked about wanting to do something unique. You talked about doing book signings in cigar shops and doing them at other non-traditional places. What are some of the other things that you've done that have been successful in terms of reaching new audiences?
I think as far as online right now is my Patreon page.
Okay, so how is that? How does that work?
So Patreon is I guess relatively new as far as people have seen it. So it's a pay-based, you subscribe, and then there's different levels. So for $1 a month, you can subscribe and you get over 100 different chapters of stories or short stories. I do a weekly roundup of all my writing. I tell you every day how many words I wrote, what story, and a lot of times it's stuff that I haven't even announced yet. I'll shoot videos on there. I did a video of me making lunch, me making antipasto.
Okay.
And everybody thought that was like this great video, and it was just me goofing around making lunch. So it's a lot of personal stuff. I shoot a lot of different personal videos and things. And there's a $5 level where you get a short story on top every month that you haven't read anywhere else on top of that. At the $10 level, there's a novel called Bad People Doing Bad Things. It's a crime thriller. I release 2 chapters every month of that. You can only get at that level.
Okay.
Normally, even at the dollar level, there's a series I'm writing called Plan C. It's also a crime thriller that ties into my Dirty Deeds series. And every month you'll get a brand new chapter of that. So and it's personal. People ask me questions on there. People are commenting on the posts. People are telling me what they love. And what's great is it's my first draft. It's literally a lot of times it's like, okay, this is due on the 1st. The day before I'm finishing that chapter and then posting it up the next morning, and people are giving me feedback on it, which is great. So I'm writing the 2 different novels at this point. People are reading it it's like they're reading it in real time.
And exposed. And there's a recent quote that I heard from Neil Gaiman talking about, if it feels like you're walking down the hallway naked, you're doing it right because you've exposed yourself.
Right.
And these are the fans who are getting this benefit of having access to you, even though you still have your privacy and you still have your personal life, but they have this special access to you that nobody else has. It also leads back to that 1,000 true fans in many ways, because these people can't get enough of you, and
Right.
this gives them that extra special treat, and they know that those things that you're releasing are for them.
Right.
And it's not. Is it a them first, and then some of the stuff gets released, wide, or is it?
It's mostly them first, or even if I'm writing something like Belford Stories, I purposely do that with a time crunch.
Right.
So I have like 30 days to finish 50,000 words and get it edited and everything else. So for me, that's the fun of like that specific book. And it's a lot of short stories. I'm really a firm believer in writing a lot of short stories that tie into your series or your book, something else. So like in Plan C, there's just this, last month, there was just basically this throwaway line about a character who you never see, but it's like kind of a memory of somebody, of what their perception happened to this character. And I said, you know what? I'm going to write that short story just for Patreon. So that's one of the things I'm working on now for next month's Patreon. So if you're reading Plan C, which you can only read, in the group, then you'll be able to read that short story as well.
That's really cool. And again, it's a great way of putting the fan first and thinking about what they're interested in, and then engaging in that community, which is fantastic.
I'm a big believer that it'd be great to have Stephen King or Dean Koontz numbers, obviously, but I have a lot of fun because my fan base is big enough to sustain me to be able to do this full time, but it's small enough that I can engage with quite a few of those people and just have fun with them.
Right.
I think that's important. Going back to Scares That Care, there's a lot of those fans that show up there. And there's a great fan, Tim Feely. The first year he showed up there, he has his Dying Days shirt on, and he bought a dozen books from me, and it's great. And he showed up at Beers and Fears and literally looked at the table and he's like, I own everything here. It was crazy.
That's fantastic. You've done what I love is you're a hybrid author. You work with publishers, you work with small presses, you do independent stuff. You're also doing digital only exclusive content for your fans. When you look back at all the things that you've learned over the years, 30 years of experience in the writing and publishing industry, when new writers approach you, what's the most common question that they usually ask, apart from how can I have sales like Stephen King and Dean Koontz? But what's the advice that you tend to always favor to start leaning them towards?
I think one question I get a lot with authors who are, obviously their end goal is to be a full-time author. But I think one of the things is they want specifics. They want, how much money do I need to make? Those questions. And that's really so personal because, all right, so when I was doing the Hollywood stuff, there was another author who was also doing it. And we were making good money. I mean, literally the first contract I did, the first book I did with them was a serialized, like a 12-part serialized called Russian Zombie Gun. And it was a zombie thing set in Miami. It was right after like the bath salt, the guy had eaten the guy's face on bath salt. And they basically made this whole thing out of it. And I made enough money to basically pay off all my debt and live for like 6 months. And so we got like 3 or 4 books in, and this guy started being like, well, let's make more. We need to make more money. And I said, maybe you do, but I don't. I'm comfortable where I am. And so I always tell people, where are you? How much money do you need to survive every month? I have 3 kids who are grown. My youngest is 17, and she's a senior this year. But I have a great system. My wife makes phenomenal money. I mean, she has a career. She's been doing this for 11 years. Right before I met her, she had a house built. We travel all the time. We go to, Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. We're season ticket holders for baseball. We're constantly traveling and having a lot of fun. So my money's kind of the play money. My money's the, hey, let's take a chance on advertising or different things. The Project Entertainment Network is making us enough money we can put back into it and do swag and stuff. So, that question to me is really something that I can't answer. I could technically live on making $0 every day. My wife would hate me, but we would still live because we're living off of her money.
Right.
But I know authors that have, tried it. And Chuck Buda is a great example. Chuck went full-time author for almost a year while he was looking for a job. And, and he's very truthful about it on an episode of the Mondo Method podcast. He almost lost his house. He just couldn't afford it. He had 2 kids. One of them was, at the time, was about to go into college. The other one's in high school. And, living in New Jersey with, the taxes and everything else, it got to be the point where he realistically couldn't do it anymore. And so I think that's really what you have to look at. Can you do it? What's your financial situation? Do you have money in the bank? Always, obviously the always thing is have the 3-4 months worth of money, that cushion, because in this business, while I can kind of guess how much Amazon's going to pay me every month, some months it drops to half. Some months you get screwed by a publisher, and I've had that happen to me several times, where I was owed a lot of money, and that runs out. Sometimes you get all of a sudden. Like Amazon came to me. So I got my Dirty Deeds book. The first one, I won a Kindle Scout contract for that. So I had all that behind me, all of Kindle and Amazon behind me, pushing the book. And I still do very well with it. And about 2 months ago, they came to me at Amazon and said, hey, we want to put you in Prime Reads. And we're going to pay you thousands of dollars to put you in there. Well, of course I'm going to do it. That was money. That was like found money at that point, So it's really you can't bank on it. You're not getting a paycheck every week.
Right. And it fluctuates as different projects come into play, and probably fluctuates more with traditional publishing than it does with, because you get paid every 90 days from your Kindle sales and your KDP reads and stuff like that. So what's next? What are some of the projects that have either just released or are in pre-order right now that you're pretty excited about?
I just put out a few months ago. I put out a nonfiction book about baseball. I'm a huge baseball fan, and last year we started. Well, the year before, but last year was our first full year of going to the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp, which is the AA of the Miami Marlins. And about halfway through the season, I said, you know what? I want to see if I can write a book. My love of baseball I grew up in a family of baseball fanatics. And then, like, a breakdown of their entire season was the first year they were the jumbo shrimp. So they had a lot of excitement and a lot of media and everything else. And when I went to their general manager and asked him, the assistant general manager, Noel, he was like, I would love that. That would be great. So I was able to interview all the players. I was interviewing the owner of the team. I mean, ushers, everyone. And that came out a few months ago, and it's doing phenomenal. And I even had a book signing in April at the stadium during one of the games and sold a lot of books. And what was funny is when we did the Beers and Fears tour, we only brought about 15 of them, thinking, well, this is a baseball book about, Florida. Maybe no one's, but everybody's like, no, we want to read it because of your part of it. And we actually sold out all 15 books in a couple of days, which of course I kicked myself. I'm like, man, I should have brought 100 of these. This would have been the big seller on this.
It's a long drive back home, right? To go.
Yeah. So that was tough. So that came out recently. I wrote a Dying Days young adult novella called Family Ties. And the fun of that is it was about 2 years ago. There's a fan of mine, Misty, and both of her children, Emily and Mason, have Down syndrome. And they were a bunch of authors got together, which was cool because of her medical bills and everything. And we did an anthology called Bite-Sized Offerings, and all the money went to Misty for hospital bills and stuff. And I wrote a short story. They wanted like a young adult, and I had never written young adult. I wrote a short story I said, can I use your kids? And she loved that. So she loved the short story. And a few people have been saying, when are you going to write something? I always say my kids, even though they're 22, 21, and 17, I still don't want them to read some of my stuff. And so I said, let me write something that my kids might actually be able to read. And that's how the novella came about. And so it just got released. And which is really cool because Misty's been promoting it. And then the best part is at Scares That Care this year, she'll be there with Emily and Mason. And they're actually going to sit in with me on Saturday for about an hour and sign copies of the book. I'm like, that's pretty cool. And so I actually have a thing up now where if you can't make it to Scares That Care, basically for the cost of the book, I'll cover the shipping, and I will actually have all three of us sign it and ship it to you.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So more people can get that, because I've never met them before, and they're very excited. She's very excited to be there, and it's it's cool. And I try to be respectful of them and have a lot of fun with it and kind of get to know them. And they're actually, the two of them are actually on the cover of the book and stuff. So that was really cool, and I enjoyed that. And then I just put up Dirty Deeds 5, which is in my crime thriller series, and it's actually part of it's set in St. Augustine and Jacksonville. And actually, again, I was allowed to use the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. I was allowed to use the actual ballpark and the name of the team, and they love that. And I'm sure at some point I'll do a book signing again, either this year or next year for that. So,
and Dirty Deeds looks like it's a series that involves serial killer, and is that the one I'm thinking about?
So James Gaffney is someone who's hired to kill children, either say a rock star or a senator or people with obviously a lot of money. But instead of killing them, he actually moves them to a better life, especially if they're young. He actually has people who do that. And the book, when I first started writing, it was actually very dark. It was actually about a guy who has to come to grips with killing children. And I said, I'm sick of writing this type of book. I want something more light. And then the Kindle Scout, like 2 days later, the Kindle Scout popped up for me. And I said, this is it. I'm going to write a mainstream type of book. I'm going to write something that my wife would read. She reads Janet Ivanovich, and she loves cozy mysteries and thrillers and stuff with humor. And that's what I wrote. And Amazon loved it. So I did the first book with them, but they wanted to release it like every year. And I said, you know what, this is 50,000 words. I want to do two a year. So I've been doing that. I've been writing from 2 on my own. It's everybody who read it said, oh my God, James Gaffney, that's you. I mean, it is completely 100% you. And but I have a lot of fun with it. So that's kind of the premise. When people read and basically it's like I get paid a lot of money to kill children. People are like, oh my god, and then once they read this next couple of lines, they're like, oh, okay, good. I'm not really going to read about that.
That's funny. That's funny. Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your wisdom, and all the different projects you're working on. Where can people find out more about you and get a hold of your products and learn more?
You can go to armandrosamilia.com, which is my website, which I'm on occasionally. The easiest place is on Twitter. If you go to Armand Author, I'm on there most of the time. Obviously, if you go to Patreon, Patreon, and look up Armand Rosamilia, you can find me there. I post a lot of free stuff as well on there, like upcoming releases and different things. And author Armand Rosamilia on Facebook, although I've kind of gotten away from Facebook. And then I'm on Instagram as well as Armand_Rosamilia. I probably should have just used one name.
Sometimes they're not available, so you got to go with the underscore.
That's the problem. I have several cousins with the same name. People on Skype always send my one of my cousins a message.
And I loved your latest book, and he said, "Oh my God, my cousin again."
That's my cousin.
Well, thanks so much for hanging out with me today, Armand.
Oh, thanks, Mark. It was a lot of fun.
I already talked about thinking outside the box in relation to the venue that Armand spoke about by doing the Beers and Fears tour last week in episode 25, so I won't go into much detail there, but I did want to call out that I like the sense of mingling and the casual nature of the event that he described. I mean, it's not an author sitting behind a table where people feel uncomfortable and may not want to approach. It's a casual gathering where people have a chance to check out the books with no pressure. I'm looking forward to testing something like that out myself, and we'll get a bit of a feel for this this coming Saturday, which is just a couple of days from the day that I'm recording this, at Grain and Grit Brew Company in Hamilton. I have a vendor table there that I've purchased, and my skeleton Barnaby Bones and I will be there with a bunch of my books at a table, with I think 6 other craft and artisan vendors, and it's called the Ainsley Community Market, and it'll be in the brewery parking lot. It's an experiment that the brewery's doing, and it's an experiment that I'm doing. Earlier today, I went to Canadian Tire, and it was a great sale for the summer solstice, and I bought a folding 6-foot table and a pop-up tent shelter, to keep the sun off my bald head or the rain off my bald head if the weather goes south, which will be handy for future events that are outdoor. I've never done an outdoor event, so that's kind of cool, and I've never done an event where I had to bring my own table. But in any case, we'll see how that experiment goes, and I will share my results in a future episode. Now, speaking of results, the ongoing free promo at Kobo has kind of been winding down. It's in the 3rd week now, but I'm still much higher in terms of the average daily downloads than before the promo started, so it's still a positive thing. But again, it's starting to peter off, so I'm still getting... where I was getting maybe 1 download a day, I'm now getting about 8 to 10 free downloads a day of that free first book in that series. I still only have 1 review and 2 ratings, and I still have only sold a single title of book 2 in that series. However, when I looked into it, I did start to see some action on the other retailers. So on iBooks, for example, even though there were only 8 free downloads of Volume 1, and again, no promo in that area, and so Volume 1 was Night Cries. I got 8 downloads there. And I've sold 2 copies of both Volume 2, which is Ode to Classics, and Volume 3, Dark Shadows. So that's kind of cool. Nook had 6 free downloads and no sales, and Google Play had 1 free download of Volume 1 in the Nocturnal Screams series. So, based on the fact that there was stuff going on the other platforms without any promo, I thought, okay, I booked some BookBub ads individually to drive traffic to each of Kobo, Nook, and iBooks, and Google Play for free. And another ad to Kindle for the 99-cent title. Yes, Kindle still has not price matched the free, despite multiple efforts towards that, multiple efforts in emailing them. But in any case, those ads started today, Thursday, June 21st, when I'm recording this. And I'm running them for a week, and I'm running them separately so I can kind of measure them all and compare and contrast and see what's working well. So far on Kobo, my downloads have actually increased. Now, yesterday on Kobo, through Kobo Writing Life, I saw I had 7 free downloads. Now, today, the day the ad started, I had 10, so it's increased slightly. I've gotten hundreds of impressions based on the report from BookBub on each. And I got a handful of clicks on Kobo, iBooks, and Nook, but not a single click on Amazon yet. It's an interesting small experiment. We'll see where it goes, and I'll continue to share those results so you can see how that worked out for me. But one last reflection on the chat with Armand, and that's the connection and engagement he has with his reading community. Yes, the beers and fears and the scares that care, these are types of connecting with real people and being a genuine participant and a caring participant in that. But even in his digital or virtual life, he has that connection with his fans through Patreon. I love what he said about being a big enough author to support and sustain him, but being a small enough author to be able to engage and interact with his community. Now that is where the magic lies, because it's that engagement that makes it real for his readers and fans, and also makes it fun for him as well. So he has that magical connection of just being that Goldilocks size is just right size, and that works for him. And one last note, or one last reflection. I love the success of Armand's Belford Stories books. Now, he wrote tales about his hometown when returning to the hometown, and they snatched it up. This was the one where he had told me they'd, I think it was 130 or 150 copies that sold at that very first brewery signing, which kind of blew him away. And it would blow me away to sell. I mean, the only time I've ever sold more copies than that was when I was doing a book signing at Costco. So it's very rare to sell that many copies when you're not a big name author. Now, this experience that he shared reminds me, yet again, of that niche market focus and having fun with writing these stories and characters that he enjoys returning to, and how that genuine connection results in greater sales. Last episode, in episode 25, I shared my own successes with my own hometown books, like Spooky Sudbury, where there's a direct tie-in to the community, and how that smaller population community really supported and really lifted me up. It makes me realize that I should really spend more time focusing on more projects that target and feed that hungry and supportive community. Give them more of what they've shown me they love. Rather than trying to shoot for larger markets, write something they love and give them something they love. Again, this chat I had with Armand earlier this week helped me reconfirm a thing that has been burning in the back of my mind. That's why I love doing this podcast, and that's why I love talking to people and getting insights from them every week, because it helps me to continue to grow and learn as a writer. I hope that this great interview and perhaps some of my reflections gave you pause to think about how some of these concepts may apply to benefiting you in your own writing life. Thanks for hanging out with me, for listening to this podcast. Until next week, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you good writing and great Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.